Hello YouTube! My name is Nye, you join me again in the Finale Guitar Shop in Sheffield, and you are watching my channel Folk Friend, your one-stop shop for Celtic backing guitar. In today's video I'm going to be carrying on with part 2 of my guide to the chords of John Doyle. Next week's part is going to be dealing with his unique strumming pattern for reels and how he takes a very simple pattern and uses some real cool syncopated accentation to make a lot of really interesting variations out of that simple pattern. So if you do want to get that video straight to your inbox, then hit the subscribe button, it's just down there. Hit the little bell next to it as well and select all notifications, and that way you'll get a little thing in the top right corner of your YouTube homepage which goes, here is a lovely new video from Folk Friend every weekend. While you're down there as well, if you do get something out of this video and it is helpful to you, then please hit the like button. And if you haven't seen part 1 yet, then check that out first, because that's going to show you the kinds of chord shapes that he's using, which I'm going to be talking about in more detail in this video. You can find part 1 in the corner there. So what I'm doing in this video, I'm going through a clip of John Doyle live with Liz Carroll from Boston in 2009. You can find that linked in the description box down below. I'm going to be carrying on now talking about the first tune that they play, which is in the key of C major, and I'm just going to go into a little bit more detail on what the substitutions are that John Doyle is using in that tune. On the third round through this first tune, John Doyle uses some nice minor substitutions. So he plays, instead of C, F, G, which was the basic chord progression, he switches the C out to its related minor, which is A minor. You can always find the related minor by counting 2 back in the scale that you're in. So from C, C, B, A minor is related to C major. So he switches that C to an A minor. Then, because he's done one minor substitution, if you've started doing minor substitutions, it's nice to carry on with them. Otherwise it kind of feels like you started telling a story about something going wrong, and then you just were like, oh, but then it was all fine, and you just give up on that story and carry on playing happy major chords again. So he goes from A minor down to E minor. And E minor works because it's chord 3 within the key. So you can replace chord 1 with the chord which is 2 above it in the key. I've talked about all this kind of stuff lots and lots in my previous music theory videos. One of those is linked in the corner for you now. So that's the substitute for chord 1 as well. And then he goes back up to F and carries on. So that gives you this nice kind of chord progression. When he plays the A minor though, it's not just any old A minor, he's doing it with this shape again. So he's just sliding the same shape around, he's tromboning. And actually, while he's on the way up as well, going between F up to G, he does a little chromatic shift as well, so like that. So all of that is basically tromboning, using these kind of very simple substitutions to take a very simple 1-4-5 chord progression and just make it sound a bit more interesting, and using one simple slidable shape to be able to shift around over the neck really quickly. There's one other really interesting chordal feature which I'd like to point out in the first tune. The first tune's got 3 parts. It starts out in the key of C major, and the third part is arguably in the key of G Mixolydian. G Mixolydian's the same notes as C major. If you want to find out more about what I mean by that, you can watch my complete guide to the modes in the corner up there. But the reason that it's very clearly in G, it very much sounds like its key centre is shifted to G. Even though it's the same selection of notes, there's a lot more G in there, and it's all kind of firmly rooted around G. So the kind of stock chords for that third part of the tune are basically G all the way through and just back to C in the last bar, so that's your kind of default chord progression, and that's more or less what John Doyle does in the first couple of rounds through the tune. But the third time into the tune, at about 1 minute into the clip, you'll find John Doyle doing a modification of that progression, which sounds something like this. Something like that. Now that looks complicated, but in theoretical terms it's not, and it's a principle that you can take and apply to any tune which does this kind of one part on the related Mixolydian mode trick, which quite a lot of tunes do. So what he's doing is, if you imagine that the whole section could be a great big block of G with a C at the end, something like this, then basically he's playing inversions of that G chord. So he starts out with plain old G, using his octaves and fifths shape that he always uses. And then he goes like that. So this chord that he's landing on is a B minor. What we've got there is the root B at the bottom and the minor third D up there. So that is a kind of B minor shape, but it's also, if you think about it, an inversion of a G chord, because a G major chord is G, B and D, and a B minor chord is B, D and F sharp. And this chord here is actually just the B and the D and the open B string, which gives you just roots and minor thirds. So that chord really is an inversion of G. It just hasn't got the G note in it, but it's still basically notes from a G major chord. So what he's done is he's gone from G up to A minor like that, and that's just a little linking chord to link up to the B minor. I'm going to be looking in next week's clip, by the way, in a lot more detail on how he kind of plays these syncopated rhythms and uses accented strumming to make the chord changes really clear and punchy. So check back in for that next week. Hit the subscribe button if you want to get that straight to your inbox as well. After he's got up to this B minor chord then, the next two steps are like that. So these are all chords from the key of C major. We've had, starting from the 5th degree of the scale, we had G. Then we had A minor going up to, well, it was B minor. In the actual key of C major it should have been B diminished, but a diminished chord is a root and a minor third and a flattened fifth. That chord didn't have a fifth in it, so for all intents and purposes it could have been either. Now we're going up through C and on to D, which in the key of C would be chord 2, D minor. So he's basically running through the chords of a C major scale just using these very simple shapes which have just got a root and a third, and the third changes to be either major or minor like that. So we had G major, A minor, B minor. Now we've got C and D minor. This D minor chord, if you bear in mind that we started on G, and G was our chord 5 in the key of C, if you look on my mode wheel here, you can see that chord 5 can be a dominant 7 chord, aka like a major chord but with a flattened 7th added at the top of it. I've talked absolutely loads about that in my videos on tetrads. You can find one of those linked in the corner, so I'm not going to go over why that is now, but bearing in mind that if we're in G mixolydian then we're starting from that G7 chord, then this D minor chord, if you think about that, it's actually an inversion of a G7 chord, because a G7 chord is G, B, D, F at the top there. And if we look at our D minor chord, it's D, which is the 5th of a G7 chord, and F, which is the flattened 7th related to a G7 chord. So D minor, believe it or not, is an inversion of G7, and that works because we're starting from the mixolydian mode, and therefore our chord 1 can be a dominant 7 chord. From there, he goes on 2 further steps up that chord scale, so we've got all the way up to a quite ridiculous 15th fret. So that was E minor and then F major way up here. So this F major, again, if you think about this in the context of a G7 chord, we've got F at the bottom. Well, F is the flattened 7th of a G7 chord. And up the top, we've got F's major third, which is A. So in the context of G, that's a 9th. So you could say that this is a G9 chord because it's got a flattened 7th and the 9th related to G. It doesn't have the root note in it, but arguably it's still a type of G dominant chord. So basically what we've got here is a whole run of chords. B minor is an inversion of G. D minor is an inversion of G7. And then this F chord is more or less also an inversion of G7 as well. So basically this whole chord run is inversions of G7, and that is taking the place of this whole block of G in the context of chord 1 in G Mixolydian. The thing that you can take away from this is, number one, if you're playing a long section on a chord, then run up the chord scale from it in jumps of 2 chords. So here, for example, where we've got a long section on G, it's effectively a long section on a G chord, but we're in the key of C. So I'm going to run through my C chord scale starting from G, just using this very simple shape with a root and a third. So I know the chords in the key of C starting from G. We've got G major, A minor, B diminished, which using this shape is just like a minor chord, C major, D minor, E minor. So I'd take my G, I'd go G, A minor, B diminished, C, D minor, E minor, F major. You can do this in any key as well. If you're, let's say you're playing a tune in the key of G major, if you had a very simple chord progression, G, 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 C, C, D, D, that's like the most common chord progression for a tune in G major. So I'd be going like... something like that. I could take that whole block of G and I could just go up the chord scale. Something like that. I can also do the same thing going downwards. Something like that. So anytime you've got a long block of one chord, try working up and down the chord scale from it. And if you're in drop D, it's very easy to do that by tromboning with this simple roots and thirds shape. Now I know I said this was going to be a 3-part video on John Doyle, but I've realised that this video is getting rather long. So it's actually going to be a 4-part video series on John Doyle. Potentially even a 5-part if we carry on at this rate. So next week I'm going to be having a little look at the rest of the set and how he deals with minor keys. I'm also going to be showing you some interesting chromatic techniques that he uses, and in the following week I'm going to be showing you the last part, which is going to be all about his real strumming pattern and his syncopated strumming. So if you have enjoyed this video, hit the like button, hit the subscribe as well. You will get the other parts straight to your inbox. You will also be able to join us for the Folky Fridays live stream on Fridays at 5:30 UK time. Thanks all very much for watching. I'll see you next weekend.